Ayn Rand's controversial philosophy, Objectivism, deeply influenced the development and narrative of Bioshock, so much so that the game still resonates with many of the questions being asked of society today over a decade later. Bioshock has been claimed by academics to be one of the most serious and important interrogations of Objectivism in popular culture, and that's a pretty bold claim. But what is Objectivism, and what does Bioshock say about philosophy?
I call it objectivism. First, my philosophy is based on the concept that reality exists as an objective absolute, that man's mind, reason, is his means of perceiving it, and that man needs a rational morality.
Objectivism is a philosophy that essentially promotes the selfishness of individuals, suggesting that society can only truly flourish if everyone focuses on their self-interest above everyone else's. For objectivists, a government exists only to protect an individual's pursuit of happiness. Ultimately, this leads to a society ruling itself, free from gods and kings, allowing everyone to feel fulfilled, accomplished, and truly happy.
Hey, nobody cares. Nobody cares.
There are a few very important cornerstones to objectivism: individuality, identity, self-interest, happiness, a reliance on reason and scientific advancement, and a belief that man is constantly seeking to improve himself, all of which Bioshock pushes the conceptual boundaries of. Ken Levine, the lead developer, stated that Bioshock was never intended to be a criticism of objectivism. It was a fair look at humanity, acting out a philosophy and taking it to the extreme. Bioshock never fully criticizes the philosophy, and that is what makes it so poignant. The game begins in Rapture, where objectivism already appears to be a systemic failure. Once a thriving and progressive city, the player is dropped into a world rotting from the inside out, torn apart by a brutal uprising led by citizens disillusioned with Andrew Ryan's vision. Against this backdrop, Bioshock asks two questions of objectivism. The first: in a society intent on self-interest and individualism, how can morality ever exist? And the second: what happens when absolutism becomes absolute? The conflict between morality and self-interest is often reconciled in objectivism through the belief that most individuals have no flaws. Therefore, a no-flawed individual seeking happiness will do virtuous things that naturally benefit others, resulting in constant societal progression and productivity. Any technological advancement made to help us find our happiness will ultimately be beneficial to everyone, it assumes. But Bioshock illustrates what happens to a society built on that assumption. The use of Adam, injections, and plasmids show that man's natural tendency to improve himself may not always lead to positive outcomes for society. The splices that hold their Adam and the creative citizens who focus only on their art do not reliably contribute to society and keep it stable. At one point, Fontaine states,
"These sad saps. They come to Rapture thinking they're gonna be captains of industry. But they all forget that somebody's gotta scrub the toilets."
A society needs people who act for reasons other than pure self-interest to keep it alive. The splices and junkies also illustrate what happens when a community does not all strictly adhere to the same ideology, and the splices are particularly important because they're not driven by the adherence to a political or philosophical ideology, but instead by addiction and madness. But morality is explored even more deeply throughout the game. The hulking frames of big daddies and the eerie little sisters are the keepers of morality during your gameplay, and more interestingly, help question the notion of self-interest even further. The main objective of the game is made clear at the outset: literally seek power in order to progress. The game mechanics and narrative teach you this, cleverly providing a first-hand experience and feeling of living through objectivism, causing you to make decisions you perhaps wouldn't in any other circumstance. By ensuring a detachment to the unsavable little sisters, harvesting them makes sense. It serves you in furthering your self-interest and literally helps you to progress throughout the game. It is the embodiment of objectivist principles. However, the social contract only stretches so far. The differing endings based on the moral actions performed by the player throughout the game, Jack is either surrounded by his adopted family or perhaps becomes a monstrous splicer version of himself, harvesting Adam from the little sisters. The most problematic flaw in objectivism, and the one Ken Levine exploits so prolifically throughout the game, is that it denies our inherent capacity to empathise with others. The primary focus on self-interest, to the exclusion and detriment of others, is difficult to reconcile for anyone with half a heart intent on living a normal human life. The ending, whereby control is literally taken from the player's hands to kill Ryan, regardless if the player themselves wanted to do this, emphasises this notion. How far can self-interest be taken? How can empathy, morality and self-interest ever exist side by side in practice? Andrew Ryan shunned morality and empathy, seeking a self-interested pursuit of power that ultimately resulted in the destruction of Rapture. And this is what leads us on to the second question that Bioshock asks of objectivism. What happens when absolutism becomes absolute? This is where it gets really interesting, because answering this question is not straightforward. Ultimately, Andrew Ryan abides by objectivism so absolutely that the result is complete abandonment of the philosophical principles, and it is this that leads us to Rapture's downfall. Ryan becomes obsessive about guarding Rapture from the corrupting influence of the outside world, banning interaction and descending into madness. He reasons that the city should be self-sustaining, just as each person within must work to sustain themselves. Rapture failed, but not fully because of the objectivist principles, and this is what makes it so nuanced. Rapture failed because Andrew Ryan lost sight of what objectivism was and abandoned its principles in the fight to save Rapture. By placing limits on what individuals can do in Rapture to pursue their self-interest, Andrew Ryan breaks the golden rule of objectivism, of authoritarian and government laissez-faire, to protect the individual's right to freedom. If objectivism was truly fulfilled and enacted by Ryan, would objectivism have failed? Or does the endeavour to enact objectivism absolutely create the cause for failure in itself? Levine stated that while both Ryan and Fontaine are extremists, Fontaine is the biggest monster of all, as he has no ideals or values. He doesn't fight for anything but anarchy. Bioshock warns against absolutism and unquestioning blind faith to an ideology, but also warns against blind adherence to absolutely nothing, demonstrating that opposing ideologies produce exactly the same results.